Now you were stood there on the rails, a relatively young and inexperienced bookmaker in the early days, taking on people that are very, very sharp, like Barney Curley and the like.
Correct.
Who were the sort of ones that stick in your mind, and why?
Well, I would say the first time I'd seen Barney at the races, he never asked me for a bet. I was at Bangor on Dee. Did you ever go to Bangor? It was a country gaff. Strong market. Paddy Whelan, Bob Jacobs, Lenny Bowden. It was a strong market. Barney came up to me. He said, his horse, don't take 60. He says, put me a monkey. Now, Barney having a monkey on, he's like me bending down on the floor to pick a penny up, you know. Put me a monkey on this. He says, don't take less than 6. I had a 5 for 40, 12 to 1 and fractions, 5 to 50, 5 to 60, 8 to 1 with the fractions. Bang, it's about a 7 to 2 chance. Didn't think no more of it. The horse, it's an oval track like this. He went into the second last bend, a fence in front. When he come out the last bend, it was a fence behind. Don't think nothing of it. I got pally with him after that. And about 2 or 3 years after, it was 3 weeks after Omar, three weeks after the bombings. He'd take me over to Ireland not long after his lad died. Weeks after his lad had got killed. And he was signing books, he'd written a book, he was signing books, and I was going with him, Belfast, Derry, all over the north. And they had a DAFA meeting. You know, he's Africa.
Direct Aid for Africa.
Yeah, Direct Aid for Africa. So I'm going to walk up the high street. It was about an hour's walk up the one side, everything battered. Came back, all the books were on display. Now, I saw that many races. There was only certain horses. You'd never forget an Abel first time you see it, or Batash. Proper horses you can remember. Other ones, I thought, this horse, I'm reading his books, this horse rings a bell. This was the first thing I recognised how clever he was. If ever he comes back, so James Knight and all the squealers that work for all the different firms, note this. His last piece in Barney's puzzle was the horse had to run on the track previously. A lot of horses won't go at Ripon because of the ridges. So that was the last piece in the puzzle. So this was the chapter, and I can't remember who the chief steward was at the time. Barney could literally do what he'd done. This was a trial to make sure he went round the track. This was the horse won there about 3 weeks later. So that was the first outing with Barney. Probably the best to him. I got pally with him. You know, I'd stay with him at his house and whatnot, and he'd always ask you what you fancied, he'd never tell you. But he was a good fella. One time, right, Yarmouth was a real good pitch for me. I bet number 3 at Yarmouth. 2 was William Hill, 4 was Ladbrokes. You couldn't have a better pitch. 1 was Roy Christie, who had a big punter, 10 grand punter practically every race. That put money back in the market. Ladbrokes would pay 5 or 6 times a day. It was fantastic, Yarmouth. I'd get packets of money there. Unfortunately, I'd go and have a drink, and I'm a bad boozer. I'd knock it all out in 2 races the next day because I wasn't grafting. Anyhow, this time it was the second day of the meeting. Yarmouth used to be about 7 2-days meeting and a 3-day meeting. 3-day was a big festival. Anyhow, I'd gone up the far end of Yarmouth. I mean, it's not a very nice place. Sitting outside a little wooden hut with a plastic cup. It must be 40 years ago, with a plastic cup of tea. Reading the Sporting Life, the Racing Post. I don't know how long ago it is. Anyhow, he should come up and park himself by the side of me, Barney. Well, hello, and how's things? How you going? So, get him a cup of tea. We're sitting there. Wasn't a soul within 2 miles of us. All of a sudden, I don't know if they parachuted him in. The deck chair man's rolled up. 2 bob. It was before decimal coinage. Deck chairs. 2 bob deck chairs. I looked up. He was quicker than Usain Bolt. He was by the pier inside about 10 seconds. That was Barney. But he was a good fella. You could have a laugh and joke with him, you know. He'd rather be with the chaps than with all the other trainers and stuff. You know, so you met a lot of characters. I was at Worcester one day. It was a Saturday night meeting. Ian Botham was a superstar. I think he'd just signed for Worcester. And he got a private box upstairs right by where I bet on the rails. My wife was there with another couple. We were going out to eat after the meeting. And he comes up to me. He said, I've never been here, never been to races before. What do I have to do? I said, you'll soon learn anyhow. He says, can you put me £400 on this? Favourites, about a 6 to 4 chance. I said, you've had a 600 to 4, leave it with me. If it gets any better, I'll look after you. Ping. Get his £1,000 together. His man comes down. He says, can you put it on this, the next race? I said, yeah, certainly. All of it, yes. About a 2 to 1 chance. Ping. He's now got £3,000. Next race was a bit hard. It was about 4 the field. Now Ian Botham. Fourth race, anyhow, he turns the 400 quid into about 12 grand with one race to go. I've never been there before. Bumper. Now, even to this day, I don't play much on the horses. I play on the football, snooker, rugby, everything. Don't play on the horses too much. Bumpers, any bookie out there, I would say make up, because you've only got to win a bumper, that's 6 figures. 6 figures. So most of them's trying. Some's better than others, we know. Anyhow, we had the lot on the last one that luckily got beat about an even money chance. Anyhow, he came down. He said, would you like to come up the box with your family and have a drink? I said, I've had enough for you for the day. And that was the end of him. I've never seen him to this day to speak to him. But there were a lot of footballers and people there, It was good. A lot of characters. One day I go, the old days, say there was 16 meetings at Goodwood. You had to get an allocated pitch, you had to be able to 12 of them, do 3/4 of attendance. So when I was up and down, I had 30 pitches all over the country. At first it was tough, the first couple of years, had to get the attendances in. Anyway, I'd gone to Goodwood on a Friday night. It clashed with the big Newcastle meeting in June. The next day was the Pitman's Derby. This is a good story and a true story. So there was only about 4 or 5 on the rails. I'd taken little Aaron down, cleared him off from the joint. Jimmy was with me. Anyhow, I wasn't having to, you get spells in racing, you're either flying or, whatever you do, you can't do right. He says, that is over there. He tried to get in the members. He'd got a pair of ordinary chino jeans, no socks. They wouldn't let him in the members. He says, get me the owner. Anyhow, next thing, he's gone along the rails. First race was an even money chance. I don't know whether go with it, go against it, don't do nothing. When he gets beat, I should have took a lump out of this, the usual. Anyhow, he says, has anybody got a tip sheet? So I give Jimmy a 5.5 quid it was for the time form card. I said, Jim, go and get the time form card. So I said, Mr. Packer, I didn't call him Ken. I said, Mr. Packer, this is the time form. I said, now there's 2 good things. I'm going to split in 2 shots in. There was 2 shots in to come. So the first race was something you've got to squiggle. He said, what? I said, it's ungenuine. If he wants to put his best foot forward, it'll win. Anyhow, so we now, 2 races time is the 2 shots in back to back. So that day there was a horse running at Newcastle. It was trained by Dandy Nichols and ridden by Kieran Fallon. Both superhuman when they're at the best, let's put it that way. So Jimmy had backed this horse. He'd got about 3 betting slips. It was called Rudy's Pet. It was carrying 7 stone 10 at Newcastle. Now Newcastle, they run up either side the track of the sprint. We don't know if it's the best side or not. Anyway, I'm gonna tell him this. I said, Mr. Packer, you'll think this is I'm spivvying. I said, but the trainer is a real hot cookie when the money's down. The jockey's the same. I said, you got to be on this. I said, no, look, and I showed him the slips. Jimmy had about 7 to 1 to 160 quid, 6 to 1 to 230 quid, all this stuff. It's a 7 or 2 chance. I said, but listen, by this time, Chandler, with Michael Tabor was in with him at this time, I said, you've got to take the price because they'll use, this was pre-Betfair. I said, you've got to take the price because they'll use your money to shorten it up. He has a 140 to 40, 140,000 to 40. It won 5 or 6 lengths. No wonder, I think it won the Nunthorpe or something about 2 months later. Oh, by now it's all laughing and joking. Ladbrokes make the sales busy. He bets them a 1,500 to 1 on the one I tell him. And he only bets a 2,550 is the second one on, all thousand. So he's won £290,000. So he goes into his bin, he got about a monkey on him. He said, look, I want you to have this. I said, Mr. Packer, don't insult me, because you hear the stories, what the thing was. Anyhow, that was it. Anyhow, by now, Aaron's back. My little lad, he'd be about 6 or 7 at the time. I point to Packer, I say, this man is the richest man in the world. Aaron goes up, pulls him by his shirt coat. He says, my dad says you're the richest man in the world. He says, yeah. He said, have you got any money? Aaron had got about 20 pence. He said, give me that. And he gave Aaron the £50 note. And typical kid, he was holding the £50 note up to the phone. that was the end of Kerry Packer. He was flying away the next day. I said his son again Sunday. I gave him Jimmy's number in case there was any tips for the next day, moves. He says, look, he'd been over to Cowdray Park. The two kids that was with him, I thought were security, his bodyguards. They were polo players. Anyhow, he said, look, I'm flying back home. He says, I won't forget you. He collapsed and died within about weeks. That was the end of me with Kerry Packer. But it was a good fella. Same as us, effing and blinding, and just very ordinary guy.
So there's a big figures you're talking about there. You could get on the course in those days.
Well, they all, yeah. Well, racing was, honestly, people went, when I started, the early 80s, people went to gamble. Bookies went to gamble. Punters went to gamble. The back of the rails, there'd be 10 or 12 private layers you could get 100 grand on with if you wanted to. Of course, all the bookies squealed, because, they wanted them. But I mean, Barney, well, I better not speak too much, but people weren't frightened to have a bet with them because they would pay and you could get on. The old days, most of the system was, I don't want to come into religion, but after the war, when people were happy to be alive, most of the ring was filled by Jewish bookies. They'd have all the best pitches. Now, the only ability you had to have, if somebody asked them for even 100 quid, is you could look behind you and then run off and have a 110 to 100 back. That was basically it. It wasn't until the buying and selling of pitches, and the rails became very strong, probably too strong. You go to Frankie Dettori day, I mean, I could have gone to 5 or 6 meetings that day. I fell out with Angie, my wife, at the time. We weren't married at the time. And there was no action whatsoever. It was pathetic until they were running up money and whatnot. And I'll never forget Jimmy went missing for about, this is typical Jimmy, without anybody putting him in. He'd gone up to the upstairs bookies and filled them up with the last 3. Every time I laid a 4,000 or 2 this, you've had a 900 to fall back on. Where's he having it from? The old 3 one. I did 311s. I mean, it was still more than enough. Luckily he was there. I could have done what Gary Wiltshire done. He actually bet the other side of me. But you just got caught up in it with all the, something that couldn't happen, it happened. But it was, and I'll never forget, I'd had a real bad, this is a true story, I'm not coming out with any figures now, I'd had a real bad run with that 33 grand, and no business should be like this. I'd done 90 grand in 2 weeks. Enough for me, enough for anybody. On the Sunday, the first race, I skinned it for 5 grand. It was the second day, everybody wanted to be on fire. Oh, this is the game, we'll soon be out of this. Bang, ended up level on the day. The next day I had a horse, good horse, Kailash. First horse to win 4 bumpers, and then he won his first 4 novice hurdles. I was offered plenty of money for him. I'd have probably got 400 or 500 grand for him in today's prices. He was making his debut over hurdles at Newton Abbot. So down I go. The only people who get a bet, it was all the Metcalf, Harry Metcalf. He'd give you a bet. There was the Red Ferns,
Bernard
and all them. Hills would give you a bet. The lad that was betting from at the time was called Johnny Best. 1308 on, 2600 to 16 on Johnny. So I can't bet you. He says, he's had instructions, because of. I said, well, how much have I got to give him? I'll give you a check. He says, look, I'll put it in down to cash. I went, bar it in the book, got about 3 grand, that race. The next 4 weeks, I won 100, this is gospel truth on my grandchildren's lives. I got £125,000. No business should be like that, but that was the troughs it was with the rails. But it was a good game. Everybody went to gamble, everybody had a laugh and a joke. Now they're betting 40 minutes before the first race while the race is being run. Pathetic, I find it pathetic.